cinema-like dynamisch, ja, that's a real famous club entrance in Berlin, Germany. Weil 100 Bilder pro Sekunde verbrauchen wir so viel. That was a little Lumix S1h 100 frames per second test. The Lumix S1h is a fabulous camera. It can record 100 frames per second in 10-bit, in 420 10-bit. Why should you use 100 frames per second in 10-bit? Well, probably because you want to vlog and want to be able to pull instant slow motion. Well, I didn't do this in this video. I tried to render it in 100 frames per second because I think that can look quite cool. It is an immersive feeling when you have such a high frame rate. The shutter angle, it's then a problem because you need a 1/200 shutter rule to keep the 180 degrees rule, and that consumes a lot of light. That's why low light would be an issue. We are already approximately at 5 or 5,500 or 6,400 ISO here. The Lumix S1h is a pretty good camera when it comes to low light, but low light will then be an issue pretty soon. I mean, it's 4 or 5 past midnight here. No, 5 p.m. And that's a nice Audi R8. Nice. And that is sometimes very fast an issue. And some people say, well, 60 frames per second or 100 frames per second are ultra cool, you should always film in this. I mostly film in 25 frames per second because I'm from Europe and we have 50 Hz electronic circuit system. That's why I film in 25 frames per second to avoid flicker. But 100 frames per second, why did I did this? Because this camera is capable of, and I want to test it out. Because my YouTube channel is my YouTube channel and I like to test a lot of things. Because we are free on YouTube and can test everything we want. So thanks for watching, subscribe to my channel. I think there are several people out there liking 60 or 50 frames per second or high frame rate pictures, and it is quite where you're coming from. When you are used to cinematic videos, used to cinema movies, you like probably 24 or 25 frames per second more, and when you're more used to vlogs or some other videos, YouTube content, then you prefer maybe 60 or 50 or 30 frames per second because it looks a little bit sharper. The motion blur is not so obvious. For me as a filmmaker, I mostly do commercials for my clients here in Berlin, Germany. That's what I do mostly with my cameras, and they like 25 frames per second. I never had a client demanding 50 frames per second. I had one client from a different country, and this client demanded I want 30 frames per second or something like this. But this was from a client from Mexico, was it actually 30 frames per second. That was the only time I had a shoot in this frame rate. What's my conclusion of that? Well, I will continue to shoot in 25 frames per second because I think it looks pretty cool. It's far more easy to edit because your computer have to then only process 25 images per second and not 50 or 60. Low light performance is much better in a camera when you film only in 25 frames per second, because when you film in 50 frames per second, you have then a shutter speed of 1/100, and on 100 frames per second 1/200, like in this scenario here. I think it could look quite cool, because that's the thing. Sometimes people tell me, well, shoot maybe a music video in 50 frames per second, and I think, well, I can do that, sure, because the only reason is they want to be able to pull a slow-mo in any time but I'm this type of guy. I plan my slow-mo shots and then I film slow-mo, because I know when I want to film slow-mo and I know when I don't want to film slow-mo. And actually, I find it quite more challenging to achieve a cinematic image in terms of editing and picture when you have only 25 frames per second. I mean, anything can look cool when you pull 60 frames per second and slow it down to 24 frames per second, or film even in 120 frames per second 4K. Anything can that look cool and cinematic, but not many people are able to pull a cinematic videos in 25 frames per second, maybe like I did in Iceland, because I filmed everything in 25 frames per second, which is really cool.